The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. Words from that psalm of confidence and hope. So let's be still for a few moments in the presence of our shepherd, who will lead us, feed us, and restore our souls. They were up to their waists in sea water, and their feet sank into the shifting sands, but they kept close to Cedric and followed him across Morecambe Bay. Bob and his companions had left Arnside and set their sights on Kent's Bank, a mere mile or so away as the seagull flies, but by the time they'd arrived at the far bank, they'd trudged for almost 8 miles on a circuitous route that, from a seagull's eye view, resembled the letter S. But they arrived safely, having been led by none other than the Queen's guide to Morecambe Bay, octogenarian Cedric Robinson, now from the seaside to the sheepfold, and the passage from John's Gospel, one of the lessons appointed to be read on this, the 4th Sunday of Easter. It's from John 10, verses 1 to 4. Very truly, I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him, because they know his voice. Sheep and shepherds. Scripture's full of references to both. I lost count. If you can't get to sleep, try counting those that you can remember. Now the psalm appointed for today is, yes, you've guessed it, the 23rd, what some have called the Mona Lisa of the Psalms. Psalm means song, and this is a song of confidence. The Lord is my shepherd. He leads me beside still waters. He leads me in right paths. The psalmist reminds us who God is, the shepherd, what he does, leads his sheep to abundant life, and who we are, the sheep. So God's the shepherd, but not any old shepherd, a good shepherd. Israel had had their fill of bad shepherds, just read Ezekiel 34. But God is a good shepherd, as was David, the shepherd king, and the Psalms attributed to him. A good shepherd protects the sheep, guides the sheep, and leads them to abundant life. Green pastures, still waters, and food and nourishment aplenty. John, in his Gospel, shows how Jesus fulfills the hope of Israel for a good shepherd. I am the good shepherd. I came that they, his sheep, may have life, and have it abundantly. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, leads his sheep towards abundant life. Not just life, but abundant life, life filled to the brim and running over. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. Leads them out of the sheepfold adjacent to the house, the enclosure where, in safety, they'll have spent the night. But note, leads them out, not drives them out, or chases them out, but leads them out. How different to the one man and his dog model. Mind you couldn't call it that now. Look how many shepherdesses have risen to fame. We've all seen sheepdog trials where the border collies, keen as mustard, drive the sheep down a field, circumnavigating fences, and if all goes well, into a pen. Well, chance would be a fine thing. I remember watching, when living in Bamford, the spectacle of our neighbour driving his flock of sheep down the main road through the village. Sheep in front, and Goff and his wife and his dogs behind. But this good shepherd calls his sheep by name and leads them out. And they follow. And why do they follow? Because they hear him calling out their name, and because they trust him. So we're back to Morecambe Bay and Cedric, appointed by our monarch to safely guide folk through the hazards of sea currents and shifting sands. Why did Bob and his companions follow him? Because they trusted him. They knew that he'd been doing the job for decades. They knew that he knew the tides and currents like the back of his hand. They knew that he'd led thousands of walkers across and had always had their well-being at heart. so too with the Good Shepherd. The psalmist reminds us who God is, the Good Shepherd, what he does, leads the sheep to abundant life. The psalmist also reminds us who we are, why, the sheep. So just a brief word about sheep. I know quite a few shepherds, shepherdesses and sheep farmers, and most of them would say that the sheep can be pretty daft, wayward and sometimes downright obstinate. In scripture, sheep sometimes get a bad press, wandering off, getting lost, going astray. Ring any bells? Sheep belong together, in the flock. Sheep belong with the shepherd. Cedric gave advice, instructions to those embarking upon the journey across the bay. Keep close to each other and keep close to me. Now the epistle set for today is from 1 Peter chapter 2. For this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, so that you could follow in his steps. And I refer to this because it sounds a word of warning. Following the Good Shepherd is not always plain sailing. The example that Christ left us was one of selflessness, self-giving, and yes, sometimes suffering. Sometimes we may find ourselves like Bob in deep waters, sometimes out of our depth. As we hear in the Shepherd King's Psalm, I walk through the darkest valley. Now a word here about translation. Scholars point out that the Hebrew in that sentence is ambiguous, to say the least. Sometimes translated as valley of the shadow of death, sometimes deepest distress, sometimes extreme danger, sometimes the valley of deepest darkness and despair, and so it goes on. Maybe we would want to add COVID-19 pandemic to that list. Whichever translation we choose, it's pretty obvious that the place, the situation he describes is not a pleasant one. And yet the psalmist has the confidence to proclaim, I fear no evil. And why? And why? He has the confidence to affirm, you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The Good Shepherd is with him, and this Good Shepherd can be trusted. As Walter Brueggemann puts it, God's companionship transforms every situation. The psalmist's message may have been for ancient Israel, but it's also a message for the world today. So we can take heart, for the Good Shepherd, a shepherd in whom we can safely put our trust, calls us by name and leads us, his flock, out to follow him into abundant life, life in all its fullness, with souls restored and hope renewed. Amen.